Okay, let's unpack this. Europe's a massive automotive sector. We are talking about an industry that generates, what, 7% of the entire EU's GDP.
And supports nearly 14 million jobs. I mean, it's foundational.
And it is standing at one of the most consequential crossroads in its history. The entire future of this industry really pivots on one simple date, 2035.
That's the deadline the EU set for phasing out the sale of all new CO2-emitting vehicles. It's effectively the definitive end of the line for the internal combustion engine, or ICE.
Right.
And what's fascinating here, and what our sources really dig into, is how this climate-driven transition has sort of spiraled into a high-stakes political and industrial battle.
Absolutely. We're seeing intense pressure, driven largely by powerful member states, specifically Germany, demanding the European Commission soften that 2035 ban.
Yeah, they're citing economic worries, consumer hesitation.
But they're being directly, fiercely contradicted by others, and perhaps more surprisingly, by key European automakers like Volvo and Polestar, who are already all in on electrification.
So our mission today is to dive deep into the source materials you provided. We need to figure out the core tension. Is this push to delay electrification a necessary protective strategy, for Europe's economy?
Or is it, in fact, a more profound self-inflicted wound that risks surrendering Europe's industrial competitiveness to global rivals, primarily China?
That's the question.
It's time to cut through the noise and get straight into the policy and the data. Let's start with the political showdown, because that is what is currently sowing the most confusion in the market. We know German Chancellor Friedrich Merz called on European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to soften the 2035 cutoff. What's the rationale they're using?
The argument is it's focused purely on flexibility.
Yeah.
They want to permit new hybrid and highly efficient combustion engine cars beyond that date.
Okay.
So they can say they're protecting the climate, but doing so in a technology-neutral way.
Technology neutrality, that term sounds so benign, right? It means not picking winners.
Exactly. But here, it acts as a policy shield. It's intended to delay the full transition. Yep.
And the reaction to this has been intense. Leading the charge to stick firmly to 2035 are the Swedish-based car companies.
Right. Håkan Samuelsson, the CEO of Volvo, says he just doesn't see the logic in slowing down now, especially given the massive investments they've already made.
And Michael Lohscheller, the CEO of Polestar, which is distinct, it's Europe's only all-electric car manufacturer, he was even more direct.
He was. He called pausing the 2035 target a bad idea and warned that slowing down is basically a gift to their primary rival.
And that's a great insight from the sources. We also got this fascinating context on Lohscheller, that he's a fast-talking, marathon-running German executive who seems to have a real axe to grind with his home country's attitude.
Yeah, he specifically criticized the mindset in Germany, saying everyone there wants to defend the past.
While in China and the U.S., the attitude is, what is the next idea? What is the next project?
That cultural difference in mindset is a huge part of the problem. But the competitive warning from both Volvo and Polestar is the most impactful nugget in the sources. Lohscheller's warning is absolutely blunt. The Chinese will not pause. They will take over.
And Samuelson elaborated on how they will take over. This isn't just a threat of cheap imports coming over the border, is it?
No, it's far more strategic. He argues that if Europe slows its own industrial transformation, Chinese firms won't just stay away.
They'll come here.
They will simply set up manufacturing bases in low labor cost EU markets like Hungary and Slovakia. And by doing this, they bypass any future tariffs the EU might impose.
And, crucially, gain full tariff-free access to all 27 EU member states.
Exactly.
That is a massive competitive threat. It goes beyond tariffs. It affects the core of the single market. We are talking about subsidizing our competitors' access to our market.
Precisely. And Samuelson makes this compelling historical analogy, comparing the resistance to the 2035 ban to the opposition faced 50 years ago by, mandatory safety features.
Like seatbelts and catalytic converters.
Right. His point is that without mandatory regulations, these beneficial but often costly innovations would not have been adopted universally. Clear rules drive industry forward.
Which brings us back to the policy fight over hybrids. The Greens argue that if the EU keeps prolonging the life of expensive plug-in hybrids, it will completely gut the climate legislation.
Well, it creates a self-fulfilling negative loop.
How so?
The prolonged policy ambiguity sends a powerful negative message to consumers. It implies they don't really need to buy a fully electric vehicle, and that just stalls the required scale-up in manufacturing, in charging, in everything.
It's a stop sign dressed up as a compromise.
That's a great way to put it.
So the political resistance is tied to deep economic anxiety. But let's set aside the policy arguments for a moment and talk about the economic reality, the structural issues that drove Europe into this defensive position in the first place.
The structural analysis from the data is stark. European car makers were slow to embrace BEVs, battery electric vehicles.
Right, they kind of missed the boat.
They missed the critical window to establish technological leadership, while Chinese manufacturers, backed by strategic industrial policy in huge domestic markets, are scaling rapidly and competing strongly on both cost and quality.
And this structural erosion started long before EVs became mainstream, didn't it?
It did. You can trace the decline back 2 decades. Legacy strongholds like France and Italy saw domestic car output drop steeply.
Why was that?
Because production had been consistently shifting to lower-cost factories, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, or CEV.
Right.
Italy's passenger car output, for instance, dropped a catastrophic 62% between 2000 and 2023.
62%. Wow. So that relocation strategy worked for a time, especially for German automakers. They created this highly integrated cluster with CEE countries, but that model is now under severe strain.
It is. And the biggest source of that strain,
Right.
China. China was once a reliable engine of profit for German brands. It provided the capital they needed to fund the shift. Now, it's rapidly becoming a looming liability. The data shows just how badly this has hit market share. The combined sales share of German brands in China fell sharply from 24% in 2019 to only about 15% in 2024.
And Volkswagen lost its top spot.
Famously, yes.
Yeah.
VW lost its market-leading position in its most important market to the Chinese competitor BYD.
When you look at those numbers, it's clear this isn't some distant problem. It's having painful consequences back home right now.
Absolutely. The market shift is directly translating into unprecedented pressures. Volkswagen is already talking about factory closures and plans to cut over 35,000 domestic jobs by 2030.
And the suppliers, too.
Oh, yeah. Key suppliers like Bosch and Continental are also announcing sweeping job cuts. The inertia in Germany, if it continues, will lead to severe spillover effects and job losses across that entire CE supply chain.
It's a self-inflicted decline.
It really is.
That shift from a reliable engine of profit to a looming liability is a perfect summary of the predicament. Okay, let's pivot and address the customer. We keep hearing this loud chorus from industry voices like BMW, the auto associations, claiming the current slowdown in EV sales is due to a demand deficit, suggesting consumers are just reluctant to buy electric.
Yeah, and the sources suggest that attributing the stuttering transition solely to reluctant consumers seriously, it oversimplifies the problem.
So what's the real issue?
We need to look at what consumers are actually worried about versus what the industry is supplying. Take the traditional concerns, infrastructure and range anxiety.
I know. The data shows those barriers are rapidly eroding. Charging capacity expanded a staggering 37% between 2023 and 2024 alone.
And vehicle performance has caught up. The average range for BEVs registered in Europe in 2023 was about 430 kilometers. That's well above what most people need for daily driving.
Right. And Volvo's CEO, Samuelson, noted that new models already offer 310 to 370 miles. And charging times are getting down to what he called the biological pause a driver needs.
15 to 20 minutes to top up, exactly.
So if the technical barriers are disappearing, why is the industry still insisting on this demand deficit myth? What are the real obstacles we should be focusing on?
It really boils down to 2 main supply-side issues where European automakers have, frankly, failed to meet the market.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is the persistent price premium. Surveys consistently show that price is the primary barrier, not range.
Right.
In 2024, the average BEV price in the Eurozone was still roughly 22% higher than a comparable ICE model. That is a significant barrier for the average consumer.
A 22% difference is huge, especially during inflationary times. And the second issue connects back to that market miss, doesn't it?
It does. European automakers strategically prioritize high-margin premium BEVs. They essentially overlooked the crucial volume segment, the affordable mass-market cars.
And that's a huge part of the market.
It's 36% of total sales. They left a massive gap in the market, and this created a perfect opening for Chinese firms to offer high-quality mass-market BEVs. Some entry-level models are under $7,000 in their home market.
Wow, so Europe essentially forfeited the mass market to its rivals.
And finally, policy volatility. When you are asking a consumer to make a massive purchase like a car, uncertainty is deadly.
Definitely.
Exactly. Inconsistent policy signals, shifting subsidy regimes, and critically, the continued political debates about rolling back the 2035 target.
Hmm.
It all just increases uncertainty.
And suppresses demand. Why commit to an expensive EV if the government might change the rules next year?
Precisely. It fuels buyer hesitancy.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting because the policy flexibility they are demanding, that idea of technology neutrality, is what many experts in the sources call a dangerous trap.
Be warned, it's like a sweet poison.
Sweet poison, explain that.
In this context, technology neutrality means relaxing standards to keep options like ICEs, expensive plug-in hybrids, biofuels, and e-fuels viable after 2035.
So it's a painkiller in the short term.
Right. It seems to help now, but it undermines Europe's long-term economic prosperity by diverting resources and attention from the main goal.
I keep hearing about e-fuels as a climate solution. Why aren't those compelling enough to protect the ICE market, even in the long term?
Because they are prohibitively expensive and inefficient. Our sources estimate e-fuels will cost an astronomical 6 to 8 per liter at the pump.
Per liter? Ouch.
And on top of that, PHEVs, the plug-in hybrids, are already very expensive to produce, and in some real-world studies, they're seen as highly polluting.
Almost as bad as petrol cars.
Almost, yeah, because drivers often don't bother to plug them in after the initial battery charge is gone.
So delaying the transition simply to keep these expensive, often polluting technologies alive is a strategy doomed to fail. Why do the sources view it as so disastrous for competitiveness?
Because it delays the necessary structural changes required to compete with China. If the EU retreats, the sources state it risks becoming an auto museum.
An auto museum.
I mean, the global market is moving electric, regardless of what Europe does. Clear targets are the compass for investments, and indecision immediately jeopardizes the hundreds of billions already committed to building the new BEV value chain.
Everything from batteries to charging networks.
Everything.
So CO2 standards are the necessary stick, but what about the carrot? I know carbon pricing is often brought up as a solution.
That's where the policy instrument known as ETS2 comes in. It's the expansion of the emissions trading system.
And it's an essential supporting tool.
It is. ETS2 essentially taxes the carbon output of fuels, meaning that ICEs and e-fuels would become incrementally more expensive over time, making BEVs naturally more attractive.
But you need both.
You absolutely need both. But the consensus is that CO2 standards are crucial for driving the industrial innovation and overcoming these path dependencies. Relaxing the standards now will kill the industrial momentum immediately.
But the story isn't all gloom, which brings us to the final segment. There are clear signs of renewal, suggesting this decline is not irreversible if Europe can muster the political will to act fast.
Right.
What national strategies are showing promise?
Where nations have been proactive, we're seeing success. Poland and Hungary, despite being reliant on that old German model, secured early leads in battery manufacturing by leveraging incentives.
Hungary's a big one.
It is rapidly becoming the largest hub, using a very low 9% corporate tax rate and generous cash subsidies to attract Asian giants like CATL and BYD. Poland secured LG Chem's first large-scale gigafactory.
It's interesting to see the legacy automotive nations fighting back, too. France, with its France 2030 plan, is transforming its shrinking manufacturing base.
They're creating a battery valley in the north and, crucially, favoring domestically produced BEVs through tailored purchase incentives.
And Spain is making a big play using those EU recovery and resilience funds.
They are, specifically through their PHEVs scheme. This has attracted major investments, including Volkswagen's enormous PowerCo gigafactory in Sagunto.
So these examples prove that targeted policies can work. They can transform vulnerable regions into strategic hubs for the electric future.
Yes, but there's a catch.
So the components of a competitive European BE strategy exist across the continent, but what's the final missing piece that prevents these successes from turning into a unified European industrial advantage?
Coordination. These national successes must be integrated to prevent new vulnerabilities.
What do you mean by new vulnerabilities?
We are currently creating a strategic dependence. Asian companies account for 92% of the operational battery cell manufacturing capacity in the EU.
92%.
If we rely too heavily on these non-EU firms, especially when their investments are concentrated heavily in one member state like the significant Chinese investment in Hungary, we risk trading short-term supply for long-term strategic dependence.
Depending on foreign powers for the core component of our future industry. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The sources agree that standing still is not an option. Europe needs to pivot from reactive measures like defensive tariffs to a proactive, shared industrial strategy.
One that's grounded in policy clarity.
Meaning stick to 2035 and targeted incentives for affordable EU-made BEVs to achieve sustained competitiveness. The true competitive threat is inertia and internal debate.
If we connect this to the broader picture, one of the original points made by Volvo's CEO was that just talking about net zero like the global discussions at the UN, it just won't do the job.
Right.
It is hard technical development and industrial innovation that are needed to actually execute the transition.
That raises an important question for you, the listener, to mull over. If policy talk is not enough, what specific technical developments and disruptive industrial innovations beyond just building the car itself must Europe prioritize and adopt to regain industrial leadership across the entire supply chain, ensuring we don't cede the next industrial revolution to China as well?
Thank you for sharing your sources with us for this deep dive and for joining us today.
We always appreciate you lending us your ears. If you enjoyed this conversation, please remember to follow the channel for more deep dives into complex topics.
Until next time.